Hey everyone, this is an unexpected, news flash. Naomi Wolf, CEO of DailyClout, and I'm here with one of my personal heroes, Dr. Chris Flowers, a distinguished oncologist, currently retired, but a former professor of radiology in the UC system and elsewhere. Welcome, Dr. Flowers.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And we're doing this unusual presentation because today is an extraordinary day. Dr. Flowers and Team 3 of the War Room DailyClout Pfizer Documents research volunteers, including Erica Gelf, Ed Clark, and Daniel Perrier, among the rest of Team 3, have found something pretty stunning. And I just thought it was too important to wait for a more formal podcast. And what they found, you can see it on dailyclout.io, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Flowers in just a moment. But in lay terms, as I understand it, what they found by looking carefully through the Pfizer documents and seeing things that had been overlooked by the many people now trying to sift through the Pfizer documents is that there was like a secret trial within Pfizer's clinical trials in which there were 502 unfortunate people, of which half of them were injected against their knowledge without their consent with a secret formula, which was not the formula that had been cleared by the FDA for the trial. And this formula had E. coli and DNA fragments, which independently confirms what Kevin McKernan has found at his lab in Beverly, Massachusetts. And I went, as you know, to report on that earlier. So this is, I'm a journalist, 2 independent confirmations of DNA fragments in these vials. And this bombshell takes it, a massive step further because it was a secret experiment on people who did not know they were being injected with E. coli and DNA fragments. And they had, as I may have mentioned, more than 2 times the adverse events, 2.4 times the adverse events of the placebo group. Dr. Flowers, please explain more about what you found.
So the thing that's concerned us is the fact that the FDA obviously knew this. They were giving us an emergency use authorization drug that they cleared, but they hadn't tested it properly. And what the DailyClout volunteers have done by sifting through the data actually has been there for some time now in the Pfizer clinical data. We've actually determined that there was this secret trial that Naomi mentioned. Now, at the moment, the big news that everyone's talking about is this process 2. This is when Pfizer had to transition from the product they used in the clinical trial, which was a pure product, basically like a photocopying machine that was producing this modified mRNA that produced the spike protein that was supposed to stimulate our immune system to protect us against this novel COVID virus. But when it comes to commercialization, Pfizer was never going to be able to produce enough, certainly not to treat the USA, never mind the whole world. So they were wanting a proper commercial process. So what they did was they used a commercial process using E. coli, gut bacteria. But this is actually a common process that goes on in industry to replicate DNA as a commercial venture. Mm-hmm. The key thing, though, is that during this commercialization process, normally the DNA that's residual at the end of the day is cleared out, it's purified. We're not left with a whole load of contaminants. And what's been found by multiple people, including Kevin McKernan, and was mentioned in the South Carolina Senate hearings by Dr. Philip Buchholz, there are so many DNA plasma fragments that are left, although some are short, some are longer. The concern is, what is this doing? Mm-hmm. And I became aware of this a few weeks back with a European Medicines Agency and the MHRA, which is in the UK.
And that's the equivalent of our
FDA. Right. They were concerned about this hadn't really been tested properly as part of the clinical trial. It's actually a radically different product, even though the active ingredient is the same. The mRNA lipid nanoparticles are the same, but it's the way the mRNA has been produced that is vastly different.
Can I jump in here?
Yes,
for
indeed.
my job is to ask the kind of layperson's questions. So basically, let me nail this down. So you're saying there was a bait and switch, basically, which is something that other people recently have been also trying to hammer down. Is that correct? That what the FDA said was the formulation that they were okay with for the clinical trials. Pfizer substituted a completely different formulation with a different kind of manufacturing process that was much more dangerous. Is that a fair way to say it?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the crazy thing that we couldn't really quite get our heads around a few months back. That the fact that when we got to the commercialization and we got these DNA plasmids, there's not really been any discussion within the FDA that we've been able to see about this contamination that's been going on. Because there was one of the European FOIAs revealed that the European Medicines Agency had known about the potential contamination, that it was way above the amount of DNA that's normally allowed in this sort of process, because it's, as I said, it's normally cleaned out.
So basically, our equivalent of the FDA in Europe has become aware of this contamination and is freaking out and asking questions.
They actually knew about it back in 2020.
Oh, wow.
This is even worse.
That's even worse.
It goes back to 2020 because this extra trial was actually done in late October 2020.
Oh my gosh. So you're saying even before November of 2020, which was when these injections were commercially rolled out, into our arms, the big campaign began in November of 2020, both the FDA and certainly Pfizer, who was doing it, and the European Medical Association, for those of you who are listening from Europe, knew that Pfizer had substituted a formulation that was a rogue formulation that had contaminants, including DNA fragments and E. coli, and they didn't stop everything and say, don't put this in people's
They didn't
arms.
stop. In fact, what happened was it was the EMA who asked the FDA to include, and Pfizer, to include 250 people, a small trial within a trial.
So this secret trial you all found was initiated by the European Medical Association, asking them to see what happened if 250 unsuspecting people were injected with E. coli and DNA fragments
without any
in October of 2020.
2020.
And then Pfizer did it.
They did.
And then the other shocking, unbelievable thing. I mean, this is all so incredible. It's hard to wrap my brain around, but talk about the 2.4 times level of adverse events that these unfortunate 250 people suffered.
Yeah, well, we've known about these 250 people who were in the trial, but there were also 250 placebos in that trial as well. In total, it was actually 502 people were involved, 250 placebos, and then
so they got saline or something.
That's right. That's what they got. So they weren't at danger, but these 252 people who received this process 2 had a special batch which ended with a Z designation at the end,
like cyclone.
So that's how they managed to. That's one of the ways we managed to find out of this trial, because initially everything was just mixed in.
They had a Z designation at the end.
Correct. Yeah.
And that was the contaminated injection.
Don't
you find that a little creepy and disturbing? I mean, I know you're a scientist,
why
you're not
Z,
supposed to, but that seems very disturbing. And so could you tell from the documents, and I know one of the frustrations, no doubt, about your role as one of the leaders of this incredible team of volunteers is when people ask you if something's in the documents and it's just not clear, and the documents can be very epigrammatic, I would say.
Yes, that's a good description.
Can you tell who these poor 250 people were who were experimented on without their consent, or where they are?
We can. Thanks to the amazing work of our volunteers, one of the people in particular was Erica Delph, who's otherwise known as the Angry Pharmacist. She is going with a vengeance at this data. She noted that there was an anomaly in the randomization numbers because we get these huge, great big databases of randomization numbers and randomization is just determining who's going to receive this test drug and then who's going to receive saline or whatever as a placebo. So she found there was an anomaly, and they all started with this number 4, it was a 6-digit number, and this didn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. And so it was sort of filed away in the back of her brain until I started bringing up about this phase 2 trial and looking for 250 people who'd received that designation. So that's how we found these 502.
And where are they?
And they're all from the US. They're from 4 sites in the US. And we've put that down in our report. You can actually see the sites.
Oh my, what 4 sites?
Baltimore,
oh my gosh.
New Jersey.
Oh my gosh.
I can't remember, and 2 others as well. All in the US.
And these are people who thought they were just volunteering for a COVID test? I mean,
well, we don't know exactly how, because if you can talk to Brooke Jackson about how they were sort of consented or not consented, as it were, truly for this trial, because it's a very unusual trial, because even now there isn't really informed consent.
No. Indeed. Well, but what you're describing is literally the definition of unlawful experimentation on human subjects according to international and domestic law. Since there was a substitute formula with contaminants in it, and this was not, I think the thing that leaps out to me is that we can't dismiss it as a mistake or an oversight, because the trial was specifically designed to inject these people with these
and also
contaminants.
Because it was known in 2020,
right?
It was known by the European Medicine Agency that there were DNA contaminants way above their normal basic top end.
Did they know there was E. coli?
Well, the E. coli is the stuff that produces the DNA.
I see. So
and normally the E. coli aren't actually, it's not in there, but it's the DNA.
Right.
There's all sorts of stuff in these DNA fragments.
Like what's worse than DNA?
Well, the DNA is the stuff, if it gets incorporated into your genes, turns you into something different, turns your cells into doing producing
give a
things.
Hypothetical, well, like cancers.
Well, yeah. So the Dr. Burkholdt testimony was a good example of that in South Carolina, because his concern was that because of these enzymes in our body called reverse transcriptases that take the messenger RNA or fragments of DNA, and they incorporate it. They actually incorporate that into your cell. And so if it gets into there, potentially this is one of the causes of cancer. And especially as we've seen since the vaccine's been out, these turbo cancers that are affecting young people. There are multiple cancers, different type of cancers. They progress very rapidly. They can go from no symptoms to being on death's door within a day or two. We've got plenty of examples of that. And they're very difficult to treat. So oncologists are having one heck of a time with some of these cancers.
And they're going to be difficult to treat because this is a novel thing that's been done to human beings. It's not how cancer is organically.
Correct.
As you would know from your career treating cancer.
Correct. So
go ahead, please.
So, I mean, the interesting thing about the turbo cancers aspect is there has been a gradual increase in cancers over the years, especially in younger people. But it's like a logarithmic change. It goes from a gentle curve. It's gone whoom.
In
like that.
2021,
In 2021. And Ed Dowd has shown this with his excess mortality data from the insurance industry. So
can I jump in and go back to the informed consent question? So presumably this, by definition, as I was kind of struggling to say, as the enormity of this makes itself more clear, these 250 people in Baltimore and in New Jersey,
Texas and I'm trying to
Texas and one other location, we will find and post, they could not have consented because what they were getting was not by definition what they signed on to get, right? It was a substitute formulation.
Yes, and there's no indication that they were given a different consent form.
Right.
We're not even sure that the people administering the trial locally at that site knew.
Right. Oh my.
So they were just coming for this new mRNA, and they just happened to get, we're giving you the commercial one, which people are going to be having routinely,
right, all across the country, all over the world. No big deal.
Within a few weeks, the EUA was going to be granted, but that mini trial within a trial had been slipped in right at the end. but we hadn't really pulled apart the information until we knew this data about process 2. We started looking at it.
Process 2 is the
Is
substitute, this like
this
secret
commercialized process with the contaminants. But it's our team, the DailyClout teams.
The euphemism. So process 2 is really a knowingly contaminated substitute for the COVID vaccine.
I mean, they could have
I'm not overstating, right?
No, because I mean, the normal process, as I said right at the beginning, is that they clean up this stuff. It's not supposed to be in there.
Oh my God.
You know, they use proteases. They use all sorts of different enzymes to get rid of this contaminant.
Right.
You're supposed to end up with a pure substance.
Right. Can very funny, Saul Goldberg. Can I ask? This may be a not very well-informed question, but when I went to Kevin McKernan's lab, the Janssen & Janssen vials were clear, and the Moderna vial was really murky and cloudy, like visibly cloudy to the naked eye. That's
lipid nanoparticles. Yeah,
right.
Pfizer had the same thing. Some of the whistleblowers who worked at Pfizer in quality control said they used to use this light table, and they used to watch the vials as they came, and they had to pull out things that were obviously contaminated because right the get-go, one of the Japanese batches had to be removed because they had metals contaminated.
But this is, I mean, with metal fragments, you can think, okay, sloppy oversight, sloppy contractors, greedy factory. But this, I'm really worried about what you're saying. I'm worried about New Jersey, honestly. And I want to look more closely at.
But we've all got, anyone who's had the vaccine since received this contaminated product.
How do you know? Well, that was
because that's the one that EUA was given based on the commercial. That's what
it was given on process 2.
Everyone got process 2.
And you are the ones who figured out what's in process 2, which is
no other people have found out what's in process 2. We found the evidence within the Pfizer trial.
Got it.
Of how it was slipped in right at the end. It was kept separate from the main clinical trial, so they could determine. And that's when we compared that small group of 502 people. We compared the people who received this product with those who didn't,
and then
they had more than two plus times.
Oh my God!
Adverse events.
So basically, you're talking about everyone who got the Pfizer injection got the process 2.
They got process 2.
Emergency use authorization. They got process 2, which means they are now part of the group that is aligned with or similar to the group that had 2.4 times the adverse events as the placebo. So basically, it's not an overstatement to say if you received a Pfizer injection, you are in a group that is 2.4 times at higher risk of adverse events than if you had never received the injection. Is that a fair way to say it?
Absolutely.
Oh my God. All right. Tell me about some of the adverse events. And just before you do, I was going to say, I'm worried about New Jersey because New Jersey is one of the 2 locations, the other being Andover, Massachusetts, where Fosun Pharmaceutical, the CCP owned pharma giant, which contracted to manufacture the Pfizer injection and to distribute it, one of their distribution points is in New Jersey. So, I know you're a scientist, you're not supposed to be doing a political analysis, but I've thought this was a bioweapon. What you're describing, especially slipping it in at the last minute, it's especially lethal. Let's go ahead and roll it out. To me, that sounds like an act of war. And I'll just leave that there. But go ahead and talk about the adverse events that you're seeing for these unfortunate
because it was a small number of people who were involved in a trial. I mean, you can't really say much about adverse events, but there were a lot of regular adverse, simple adverse events, not the ones we've found in the documents about the severe adverse events. These are much more in the way of the pain in the arm, the swelling, the temperature, that sort of thing. But even that is indicative of an inflammatory response of the body.
Right.
So the fact that it happened with the process 2 injection, if I was on the committees, the regulatory body, and I saw that just safety signal of the injected group versus the placebo group, then I would ask the question, what is happening? Why is this happening? Should we look at it again?
Right.
Should we now restart the clinical trial? It would have taken 2 more months.
Right.
But they'd have done the trial based on the actual product that was granted an EUA.
Unbelievable. Let me jump in with a clarifying question for me. In the Pfizer documents, it's so striking that like one of the top adverse events is joint pain, like arthritis. Someone in the chat, Frida Merkel Chase, says, I have a few friends who've been injected who are dealing with serious gut issues. I wonder if it's related. One was hospitalized for 5 days. So many people have had other inflammatory problems like autoimmune disorders, asthma, allergies, skin problems. These are inflammatory, as I understand it. Neurological problems, those can also be inflammatory, right?
Or they can, but they can be the lipid nanoparticles getting
We've talked
into
about
the myelin
that.
sheaths.
You broke that story, and at my request. But does the fact that there's this dramatic inflammatory signal in these unfortunate unwitting 250 subjects, is that related to some of the inflammatory side effects that are more serious that we see? Like over time, if there's inflammation in the body, what happens?
Yeah, we don't have enough information because we've only got this small group of comparisons, but we do know from the post-marketing experience, which is mainly people who receive this process too, and we've been reporting on over the past couple of years, that, you know, GI symptoms, big problem, neurological problems, big problem. You know, Bell's palsy, Guillain-Barré.
Could neurological symptoms be caused by this?
Well, it can, yes, absolutely.
How could it? What's the mechanism?
Well, part of the mechanism is the inflammatory response has been proven to be different due to the shift between IgG1 to IgG4. Now, what all these numbers mean? Well, IgG1 is the thing that basically identifies a foreign object and tells the body we need to deal with this. The shift to IgG4, that's more of a response that tolerates things. So you've got a cancer cell that's growing, for example, and instead of the body attacking it, it's going to say, "Oh no, don't worry, it's one of our own."
Because of this process 2 injection, it can cause the body to say, "Okay, no problem."
Yeah, there's been a lot of papers on that shift of IgG1 to IgG4, so that's one of the potentials. But we also know there was another very good paper that came out for patients with lung cancer, and they showed the people who'd received the vaccine had got this inflammatory response, just like we noticed it when the big news was on during COVID, this cytokine storm. Well, this was the sort of inflammatory reaction that was found in the people who've been vaccinated compared to people who haven't been vaccinated.
Good God.
Very interesting.
Could that explain why some people who have been vaccinated just feel bad? Like they have a general malaise. They never feel quite the same as they did before because they're in a state of inflammation.
We have family members like that, and it is problematic. Our postulate, though, is that's the spike protein. Some people call it long haul COVID and things like that. But effectively, that's the spike protein has been shown to be present all around the body persistently on autopsy studies.
All right, so let's go back to inflammation. I mean, presumably, like E. coli is in feces, right? And I know that it's normal, to use E. coli to grow mRNA, right? But is there something unusual about the way process 2 injects E. coli into the body? Is that a different process?
It's not injecting E. coli, it's the product made by E. coli. Think of E. coli.
Is that a bad thing to have in your body in this way?
The DNA plasmid fragments you don't want. They're supposed to be cleared out. Just think about E. coli is the factory. And you put in the product you want duplicating, and the bacterium actually duplicates that product. So it makes lots of it and sends it out.
What can I just
so you get rid of the E. coli, and you're supposed to be left with these DNA plasmids that have the RNA in it that you want. But it was supposed to be cleaned up, and it wasn't cleaned up to the specifications of the very loosely formed guidelines from the European Medicines Agency,
Gotcha.
because no one really knows what the upper limit should be.
Right.
They just picked a number.
They just picked a number. So it was risky to start out with, and nonetheless, the level of DNA contamination is far higher in the process.
It shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been there. It should have been cleaned up.
Is there any way the body can get rid of these DNA fragments and plasmids once they're in the body?
Well,
what can people do who are listening and freaking out is basically what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, we have hope that our own bodies will deal with this. That our own enzymes will clear out most of the DNA. So that's what, if you think about it, most of our severe adverse events we've reported on have occurred within the first 24 to 48 hours after vaccine. So it may be that our bodies have cleared away most of that, but it's ended up with severe adverse events.
Right.
And some of these, some aren't bothersome over the long term, but a lot of them are. People who've had strokes, people who've had myocarditis.
Could this injection cause things like brain damage, a story that you broke? I mean, if they're contaminated fragments zooming around your body, couldn't it theoretically cross the blood-brain barrier and cause damage?
No, because they were probably not. It depends on whether they were contained within the lipid nanoparticle. Because it's the lipid nanoparticle was able to cross the blood-brain barrier across the placenta into newborns, things or babies in the womb. So I don't think so.
Could it affect reproduction? I mean, if DNA merges with your cells, what's it going to do to reproduction? Do we even know? Do we know what babies are going to be like for people who have had these DNA fragments?
If it's incorporated into our genome, then you're going to pass that on to your children. So
what does that look like?
So, yeah, exactly. What does that look like? And at the moment, we just have no idea. I mean, this is the story of science fiction, really.
I know it really is. So it's literally a gigantic experiment on the human genome.
Well, effectively, and that's why on my Substack, I rather naughtily use a picture of a lab rat experimenting on us, effectively. Because that's my concern, is that everything that's been done really has been an experiment on us. It's been on the biggest large scale research trials without a placebo.
Without a placebo and without consent, right? And in normal science, when you get one group having a 2.4 times adverse event reaction than the placebo group, what's supposed to happen?
Well, you normally stop the trial and you normally discuss it at least to find out why this is happening. Then you go back to the sponsor, who is the drug company, basically, and say, can you clean this up? Look what we found. It's causing all this thing.
So you don't roll happily ahead and inject it into
give
people.
Something. The FDA is supposed to protect the population. That's their first line of defense. Please.
Is there anything else you've covered? All of your bombshell is overused, but this is literally a bombshell. I mean, there's just no way to conclude anything other than that Pfizer and the FDA and your European Medicines Association, well, the EMA asked for this trial of 500 probably unwitting people. Then it turned out that half of them were being harmed. The FDA waved it through, and the substituted contaminated injection went into the arms of millions of people, especially in America and Western Europe. There's no way around that. So what do people do? Where do they find you? And what's the appropriate next step, I guess? Would you say to your patients, what's the next step? How can you help your body deal with this?
Yeah, so you can find me on Chris Flowers MD on Getter. I've also got a Substack called A Bunch of Flowers, which is drchrisflowersmd.substack.com. And there I post a lot of the things we've done in slightly longer form, plus also things that I've been doing with some of the European colleagues with all of this. So, but when it comes down to how do we deal with it, we've got to maintain decent health. We've got to look after our bodies, and there are things that can be done. People are producing all sorts of sort of natural remedies to try and help us with the spike protein, which is what the main thing we're concerned about.
So if should I assume that things that people do that boost their immune system generally is helpful if you've got a contaminant in your body to get rid of it? Like, don't abuse your liver, presumably, because that's filtering out toxins. And right, I mean, no,
we've got to stop drinking these martinis.
Yeah, enough of these martinis, but also things like exercise, sweating, right? Presumably, I mean, what else can people do?
So people like the wellness company, for example, they produce there's a spike protein detox.
Right.
You can get.
But you're talking about something that's completely different from spike protein. You're talking about an actual different contaminant.
But we're hopeful that DNA contaminant is removed from our bodies naturally over a period of days.
God willing.
But again, we don't know because no one's actually done the trials.
Right. No, we are the trials is the conclusion. We are.
Well,
all these.
No one has officially measured it, and we don't have the data in a peer-reviewed journal.
Right. But this is my last observation. Presumably, all of these horrific side effects that are showing up in VAERS and in Ed Dowd's research, that's like the side effects in the clinical trial for the people who got process 2.
Yeah.
Good God.
That's right.
All right. You heard it here from us. This is independent journalism. This is Dr. Chris Flowers, a hero from our time, his colleagues, Ed Clark,
Eric Adel, Dan Perrier,
all of Team 3 are working just out of the goodness of their hearts as real scientists, real doctors, real nurses, real pharmacists to heal and save humanity. DailyClout is overseeing it. The amazing Amy Kelly is the project director and our COO. It is not cheap to bring you this information, though these amazing volunteers are working out of the goodness of their hearts. We have unbelievable hosting costs, legal costs, editorial costs. So if this has been helpful to you to understand where we are and what to do about it, please go to dailyclout.io and send us a donation. Please, this is how we keep our doors open. And follow Dr. Flowers, follow DailyClout, and thank you for joining us in this historic stream.